And away we go. What is going on, guys? A little something different today. Me and Ryan want to hop on and rage a little bit about the Eagles. Normally some Sixers content, as well as Ryan doing a little bit of everything with the college football, college basketball, NFL picks. He does do it all, but wanted to jump in and get the full thoughts out on the table after what was one of the more heartbreaking moments in Philly sports last night, which is saying something based on the string of things that we have been on. So to kick things off initially, I'm just going to toss the rock to you, Ryan, and what was your reaction as you're watching the Eagles absolutely ruin things yesterday and just over the course of that game?
Yeah, I mean, I think expectations for myself going into that game were as low as they come. By kickoff, it was one of those things where I was like, all right, maybe we have a shot. I mean, I'm still going to root for them, but I had no faith, no rhyme or reason to have any faith in that team going into that game last night. Just based off what they've shown and since that Bills game, just every single thing has just gone downhill since. And I think there's a lot more going on as well behind the scenes that we're not aware of and that we haven't really got all the details yet. And I feel like over the next week or so, more and more stuff is going to come out. But that was just an absolutely terrible no-show performance. Reminded me a lot of the Game 7 performance by the Sixers against the Celtics because just from the start, you could just see that they didn't have it. I was saying to the people I was with, by the end of the first quarter, I think you could tell if they were going to be able to make that a game or not.
Yeah.
And they just came out there and were an absolute no-show. And one of the worst collapses I can remember in a Philly team. And that's saying something.
Yeah, absolutely. And I do want to dig into more of that behind the scenes stuff and talk about kind of what went wrong and who deserves responsibility with that. But to just start with the game itself, it felt like that game was over the entire game. That we're sitting there, it's a one score game, specifically when it was like 17-9, and the game just felt so far away that there was just like no sign of life in the team. And for how defeated they looked, not just yesterday, but like this whole recent stretch of this Eagles team is so disappointing. And to go from such a night and day moment from this team was 10-1 this season. Like, we're not even
Yeah.
reflecting on that they went to the Super Bowl last year. They did all these things. But to see them go from this team that was like this cocky, fun to watch, hard-nosed, competitive team that I felt like a calling card of them was their competitiveness, their will to win, their ability to gut out games. And to see that just completely fall apart is beyond frustrating and to me still confusing how that could even happen. Like, the identity of this team is so drastically different from the one that we saw at the start of the season, and I just don't understand how that even happens.
Yeah, that's one of the things I really wanted to talk about as well. Just absolutely no fight
Yeah,
whatsoever from that team last night. And like that is the shit that just pisses me off the most with Hurts. And I think me and you might have even talked about it before. He has all his quotes and whatever, wherever he gets those from. They're all cute and fine when you're winning, but like he just sits there by himself on the sideline and just like that's one of the things when they pan to the sideline with this team, there's never anyone like going over like on the tablet with the coaching staff. They're not talking to each other. There just seemed to be some major disconnect, and I wanted to just punch through the TV when I saw him just sitting there in the coat again there on the sideline. I mean that's just what the second half of the season was, and like you said, the way that they just fell apart and completely lost like their ego and identity from what they were, because I was going into that 49ers game saying it just becomes stupid if you're going to pick against them because regardless they just find ways to win football games.
mm-hmm.
And I think finding ways to win football games really covered up a lot of the issues that we saw over the second half of the year, and it might have actually caught up to them down the stretch there. But the fact that they fell apart and off a cliff this much, I mean, that was the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. I think they're going to lose by double digits next week to the Detroit Lions. Like, that wasn't like you were playing the 49ers. So absolute disconnect in the organization right now. And I think you could see on Jeffrey Lurie's face that he's 72 years old too. Like, he doesn't know if he'll ever get to see another Super Bowl. Not trying to kill the man while he's still around, but 72 is no spring chicken. And I think we could see some major shakeups this week. I feel like there's a lot of meetings and talking to Nick about whether or not he can fix it and if he has a plan going forward.
Yeah, absolutely. And you touched on kind of the game planning side of things. Like, we saw this Eagles team absolutely dominate this Bucs team. I would argue their most convincing win of the season to start this year, outperforming them by every single metric, having over 400 yards, killing them with the running game, all those things. Then look at last night, and that just was not the blueprint. And I get some of that as game script. I thought it was a mistake from the very beginning when they deferred the coin toss. That, to me, I looked at this team going in and said, they cannot afford to fall behind. I think things crumble then. Now, granted, the Buccaneers only put up a field goal to start. That should not be something that trips up a team in that regard. But I still think that was a little bit of mistake, and still just all the times they fell behind by the sticks, where you're running at these 3rd and 12s, 3rd and 8s, and options like that. And then just going with the shotgun on so many like 3rd and 2s and options like that. Super frustrating. And the rushing game as a whole, as I mentioned, absolutely dominant on the ground against this Buccaneers team the first time they played. They ran the ball a total of 15 times last night for 42 yards. The Buccaneers outperformed them 426 yards to 276 yards. 23 first downs to 13 first downs. That is dominant stuff from a Tampa Bay team that just straight up is not that good. So when we're looking at that, and with the game plan specifically, I think being super relevant, and you can throw injuries, obviously no A.J. Brown, a ton of other things, you can make excuses, but who do you put that type of game planning issue for? And I think, honestly, your answer to this or whatever the internal answer to this kind of dictates a great deal of the direction from here.
Yeah, I mean, I think at the end of the day, it all has to start with Sirianni, even if he's not calling the plays, because he still has gone up there to the podium and said, "This is my offense. This is my thing. I'm running this," and Brian's just calling the plays. And then when you look at Brian, like Johnson, I think you really can't fully criticize the situation unless you're actually in the building knowing what's going on, because Sirianni could just give him a staple of plays and say, "This is what you're picking from." And
Right.
Johnson doesn't have the opportunity to fully implement it himself. But like you said, the blueprint, I put it out the video yesterday on Twitter that I said the blueprint is there. Like, you ran the ball 40 times for over 200 yards and a touchdown in that first matchup. But will the execution be there? No. And it wasn't, because they just failed to commit to it and stick with it. Like that first play that they ran the ball, I think it was a 9-yard rush by Swift, 8-yard rush. Next one, 2-yard rush, first down, 3 straight pass plays after that. And like you were saying too, with all the shotguns on third and short, why not? You have the most dominant play arguably in football with the push. You at least run it twice, you're going to get the first down. If they stop it once, you're going to get it again. Like, or if you just hand it off to the running back and he gets stuffed, then run the push again if you want to go for it on 4th down. And they also cowered away. Like, Nick Sirianni was one of the most aggressive coaches over these past 2 years. You have chances there where you're like, all right, we don't score the ball. We know our defense has been terrible over the entire season. We're going to have to go out there and put up some points and take advantage of every opportunity. And they cowered away on some 4th downs there where they had a chance to go, especially early on in the game. So I just very, very confusing, and their inability to adapt to what the Bucs were throwing at them. Everyone was saying it the entire week. You could ask Joe Schmo sitting at the bar in South Philly, what are the Bucs going to do? They're going to blitz. Todd Bowles is going to blitz. And it just seemed like they weren't ready for it. And the only thing that they had to go after this blitz on 3rd down was that empty formation. And time again, they didn't have an answer for it.
And no options over the middle of the field, all just these vertical routes. Some of the all-22 film that's coming out is absolutely like disgusting. Like Dan Orlovsky really giving it to the Eagles on Twitter, seeing RG3, Jay Gruden, all these other guys popping out, like having these takes, and deservingly so. That this team does deserve to get flamed for the game plan that came in or the lack thereof. Like a couple of these screenshots of like what the actual like routes that are looking at based on what the coverage is absolutely insane that this is happening. And I know I kind of buttered it up with like asking who the blame is. To shoot it to you straight here, do you think Nick Sirianni gets fired?
I do, because I've been the entire year. We kind of talked about it a little bit in the beginning, where they were winning football games, and that covers up a lot of the issues. For him to go out there and fall off a cliff like this and seemingly not have an answer or an ability to adapt to what was going on, I think that's the biggest red flag, where he could go into a meeting tomorrow morning, or if he had it today, with Jeffrey and Howie and have a foolproof plan of how he's going to change it. But are they going to believe anything he says? Because I assume that they've been talking throughout the past few weeks, like, what's going on, Nick? What are you going to do to change this? He wasn't able to. So I think going into next season with a team that still is going to have a win now roster, and you're paying a quarterback one of the top 5 salaries in the league out of any position, you're a team that is expected to win now. Like, you can't just be like, oh, let's roll it over again to another season, because if you fall apart like this again, guys are going to want to out. More of these veterans are getting a year older. I think it might just be time to flip the script, because I don't know if anyone believes in this coaching staff at the moment. And I just really am curious if something happened going into that 49ers game or after that 49ers game where really made everyone quit, because after that Bills game, man, vibes were high.
Yeah.
Niners were coming to town and they were all talking their shit. And after that, it seems like the 49ers just completely ripped the will and the life out of this Eagles team, and really just deflated any chance that they had of making some real progress.
Yeah, and it's funny, like the Super Bowl hangover stuff gets thrown around a lot for teams that make it that far and all those things. And like this Eagles Super Bowl hangover was not one of those like you wake up in the morning and you feel terrible right away. This is like one of those like you wake up and you're like, I'm still drunk. Like I'm feeling good. I'm feeling all good. And then all of a sudden, like 12 o'clock hits and it's like, oh, here we go. And that's what it felt like with this team, that like they were smooth sailing through the start of this year. And then all of a sudden, like week 11 or week 12 hits, and then it's like, there it is. There's where this team's getting punched in the mouth. And the Sirianni stuff, like I'll first say, like as a guy, as a human being, I like Nick Sirianni quite a bit. Like I like the Philly scumbag in him. I like the way that he talks his shit, that he's pumping up the crowd, all that stuff. I'm a fan of that. And even it's obviously comes off in far more poor taste when things are going south. But I personally like stand by the like you have to take the good with the bad with that. And I think players like that in general. But and what I guess is preventing me from coming fully down on Nick Sirianni is it does feel like there's so much going on behind the scenes that like we don't know who's making some of these decisions with the play call stuff with Brian Johnson, and then the bigger picture stuff. Like, were these even his choices for coordinators? Were these the guys that he wanted? And it seems that way. And I guess more specifically, I'm pointing to like the Sean Desai, Matt Patricia stuff. Like, who actually made that decision? I know Nick Sirianni stood up there in the podium and said that it was his, but if that was Howie Roseman and Jeffrey Lurie making those types of decisions, then I think this is like a deeper rooted organizational issue that
Mm-hmm.
they are then at that point like Jerry Jones without the noise, that you might not be as public facing, but it feels like that there's a lot of strings being pulled. And then that boils me back to like, so what is the actual role of the head coach of this football team for the Eagles organization? Is Nick Sirianni more or less like a player manager? And it looked like the locker room was not connected by the end of this thing. So he's not succeeding in that. He's not a tactician because we're seeing the way they've gotten out schemed week in and week out. So then is he just a guy that is dependent on his coordinators, who obviously in hindsight is 2020, but Jonathan Gannon and Shane Steichen were both excellent last year, regardless of what the public opinions were then back then. So is it you plug and play two better coordinators and all of a sudden the vibes are high again? I agree with you that the roster is close, that this still should be a win now roster. There's obviously got to be upgrades on the defense, but this team is far more talented than the level that they played up to this year. But I guess my biggest concern, and frankly, I think the finger pointing is going to get ugly, and I think we're never going to truly know some of these answers. But I feel like behind the scenes, there's some issues like beyond Nick Sirianni.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think the Eagles get thrown around as like one of the best ran organizations in the NFL, but I mean, this reminds me a lot of the Doug stuff at the end
Yeah.
of that era too, because he had his obviously the Super Bowl, he had another year going to the playoffs, success, but then they're just noise and noise and noise coming out, just and when there's smoke, there's fire, and it seems like that is in Philadelphia too. But it also brings me to the point where Nick Sirianni has gone to the playoffs 3 years being a head coach. I think his record is like 34-16 or something like that. I forget the exact number, but he's gone to a Super Bowl. Obviously, he's won the NFC, and he has his one little, or I mean, not little, I mean, a major collapse, but his real first adversity since that slow start in 2021. And then you go to fire him. Like, which one of these top young candidates is going to want to come here to coach? Like, I
Right.
think you might be more getting a retread, or kind of getting a guy like Sirianni, where the Eagles were the only team to even interview him during the first time that he got hired in that hiring process. That was like completely out of left field. Like, I know the Eagles have attractive options, a young quarterback under contract. We'll see. I'm interested too to see if he's going to have like a surgery or something this offseason, because he didn't look right athletically the entire season. But like, why would Ben Johnson want to come here and
Right.
potentially ruin his career after a quick 2 or 3 years? If Vrabel, does he want to come here? Like, I don't know how great of an NFL coach he actually is, but why would someone want to come here and know basically it's Super Bowl or bust? Like, you don't have much of an opportunity, much slack to go up, but there is a lot of more deeper rooted issues with the organization, and As much as love Howie has got over the years, it could be with him because it seems like he might be just a little bit too involved and trying to voice his opinion and whatever too much. And Jeffrey lets him do it. He enables Howie to do it, and that really could be the major issue and why Nick Sirianni might not actually be that great of a coach, because he was more so just a yes man and a puppet and just doing what he thought his bosses wanted him to do at the end of the day.
Yeah, and absolutely had a little bit of a cutout here, but I got you without all that. And to the other side of like the coin there, if you're these head coaching candidates, like if you're not that I think the Eagles will actually show interest in these guys, but if you're like a Bill Belichick or Jim Harbaugh or one of these types of guys, you would have zero interest going into an organization where you don't get the type of control that you want, where there's very clearly a short leash that we're now talking about, like Doug Peterson getting fired after literally winning a Super Bowl and within a 2-year span, and Nick Sirianni going to the Super Bowl last season and then getting fired the year after. And I get like expectations are a difficult thing, that when the bar is set so high that there's so much like little wiggle room to work with. We're seeing the same thing with the Dallas Cowboys right now. Of like, you look at just the record of Mike McCarthy, like it's pretty ridiculous that he's likely going to end up being fired. But then you actually like think about the standard that is set, the expectations for that team, and he's well within his rights to be sent packing this year. And I think Sirianni's in a very similar boat to that. But I guess like I'm really concerned that this is a long-term issue with Lurie and Roseman, and like I don't see how that fixes itself until they work themselves out. So super frustrating that is the fact. And even with like the Brian Johnson stuff and with the play call things, like it's just really frustrating, like to not be able to like pinpoint blame. And I'm not even like confident like within that building they have the same idea of either. Like it feels like there's such like to have a successful NFL organization, there has to be like such a tight and direct like chain of command of like this guy does this guy does this. That's kind of how football works. That's why there are, unlike other sports, like such specific like a defensive backs coach or an offensive line coach and things like that. And those are like small examples to bigger conversations that it looks like that. But like that is, I don't know. It feels like that structure has fallen apart with the Eagles organization, and that's super frustrating to see. We got H chiming in here saying, so we put our QB coach at offensive coordinator to keep the same offense. So why didn't we use Shane's playbook? I think that's an excellent question. I mean, Steichen, I think, deserves a lot more credit. And I'll say one of my frustrations with Brian Johnson is it feels like there's not that like ability to adapt and think on the fly, that it isn't this like, this is working, let me keep leaning into that. He feels like everything's so scripted. And the other issue that I have with Brian Johnson is we saw this ESPN report drop the other day talking about this disconnect between visions and the offense. By the way, a couple hours before game time, which is loser stuff for that to come out then. But like, if Brian Johnson, by all accounts, is like Jalen Hurts' guy, so if there's like the disconnect, like we know all the track record, how often that he's coached, and it's obviously different at the NFL level, but like it feel like if there was that significant a disconnect, it should have shown face earlier than this season, right?
Yeah, and the same thing too, like that gives me more reason to believe that this could be just more of a Sirianni issue is the fact that Brian Johnson, I believe, has gotten requested to interview for 3 different head coaching jobs. Like
Yep.
and that was reports like throughout the beginning of the year too. Like he's widely thought of and highly respected across the entire NFL. Is Sirianni potentially just holding him back and making him look bad? Like that is something that I wish we knew more of too. Like if we were able to just be in that building actually for one day and just like live in the life of like Britton Covey or something and actually see what was going on, that would make this entire stuff so much easier and have like a better grasp on everything. But I- almost at like a loss of words, just how poor it looked. Like you can watch the Rams or the Lions game on Sunday night. You got guys running wide open over the middle and just space. Nothing came easy at all for this Eagles team. Even when you look at a lot of the stuff last year, like give like Devontae Smith and AJ Brown credit. They were just going out there and making plays a lot of the times, like just players making plays. The coaches still have never schemed them open. But the thing where I kind of draw the line a little bit too with all the the Shane Steichen praise and whatnot, like if Nick Sirianni at the end of the day is saying these are my plays, this is my offense, Steichen might have just been able to go out there and like you said, kind of adapt on the fly better, call the plays more efficiently. So they're in there somewhere if this is Nick Sirianni's playbook, because it wasn't Shane Steichen's playbook. He was just calling the plays. Nick Sirianni's inability to call the plays too, because like what does he actually do on game day? Like every time I see him, all he's doing is either yelling at the ref or moving his microphone out of his mouth so he can spit. That's it. Like I don't even see a motivating factor. It's kind of the same thing with like Robert Saleh and the Jets too. Like he's supposed to be a big defensive mind. He doesn't even call the plays for their defense. Like if you're a head coach and you're not calling the plays, you're not doing it for me. Like what are you actually doing that much on game day? Unless you're going on some crazy wins and really proving yourself there. Like you have to be able to call plays in the NFL on either the offensive or defensive side of the ball. And if he's not able to do that, I think that's another thing where he's in the meetings with Jeffrey and Howie. And if they're like, you can't call the plays, I don't think that this is going to work long term. And that could be another reason why he could be on the outside looking in as early as potentially tomorrow morning.
Yeah, absolutely. And like I was really hoping when things went south this season, that's what I wanted to see from Sirianni. And in that ESPN report, it talked about that sometimes he does call plays, that there's a little bit of kind of a battle there. So who is truly in charge of this? But what I would have loved to have seen from Sirianni's perspective is as they were very clearly headed down this like breaking point downward spiral, I would have loved to see Sirianni step up and be like, okay, this is my offense. I'm taking full control of play calls from here on out. Like I call the shots and like be public about that, be upfront about that to everybody and let that be the case. Cause you're either kind of just going away with however Brian Johnson handles it, or like, at least in that case, you're going down swinging and on your own terms. And that's kind of how I felt like things like ultimately did not go. Is it's kind of, we're just going to sit here and dwell on like who's to blame, who did what, all those things. And I'm very curious what his exit interview looks like and what those kind of mindset is from there. So it's going to be strange the next couple of weeks how things come out. How soon do you think that there's kind of an answer for what Sirianni's job outlook is?
I mean, I think you have to move. You have to move quickly. Like I'd be surprised if there wasn't a press conference or whatever by Friday at the absolute latest, because I think you're also looking at potential Cowboys domino to fall with McCarthy, whether or not he comes back. But none of these other teams that are in the playoffs are relieving their head coach. Like all these teams have kind of the jump start already on interviews and whatnot because we're in the playoffs, so we didn't have that opportunity this past week. But I mean, there's a list somewhere between Howie and Jeffrey of potential head coaches that they have already on their mind. It's just whether they decide to act on it. And I guess the last thing with me with the play calling too, I'm very curious whether or not, because there was that story that came out that Gannon actually told Sirianni to step down from being the play caller. Let Steichen call the plays. Was Nick Sirianni told this offseason when Steichen left that you're not calling the plays, Johnson's calling the plays, and that came from upstairs where he didn't even have that ability, that autonomy to be like, you know what, I am going to go down swinging with my own stuff. Because that was kind of what we heard with Doug at the end, where it was like, no, you're not keeping these assistants. And he's like, all right, you're not going to let me run the show for my team, which probably he was told at the beginning, this is your show. You could do what you want. And then he gets axed from upstairs. And Doug basically was just like, all right, F you, I'm out of here. Does Sirianni do the same thing? I don't think so, because I don't think Sirianni would get hired as a head coach again in the NFL unless he really went and revived his career as a play caller somewhere. That's a big thing with him. Like if he gets fired here, I don't think he gets picked up as another head coach. So I think if he wants to continue being a head coach in the NFL, he's not going to talk back, and he's going to try to just fix it the best he can to his ability.
Yeah, I still think he's going to get some sort of chance just because he did go to the Super Bowl last year. He still has, and you look at like his career record, it's impressive stuff, like that kind of things. Like you can code up his resume to look pretty if you want to look at it that way. But I get like all the complaints, and unfortunately they're showing face quite clearly right now. And then I did want to look beyond the coaches a little bit here from the players' perspective. What's the fallout here? I guess like it's very clear that this defense needs an entire overload from a personnel standpoint, investing in linebackers, investing in safeties, in which this team has refused to for years now. And then you think about the guys like AJ Brown with all the social media noise, the clear frustration, even though he says that there's none there. And Darius Slay is another guy who is far too much in the media and far too much in I guess conscious of the things going on. I think I expect trade requests from both those guys. Do you think there's anything beyond that, and do you agree with that?
With Slay, it wouldn't really bother me. With AJ, I think you have to take the good with the bad with him,
Yeah.
with his kind of diva mentality, because we saw it at points in the year. He was playing like the best wide receiver in football. You don't just give up on that just because of a rough stretch. Like
He has a
that is
rightful
where,
right. Yeah.
yeah, for sure. But that is also where it's like where his major problems, because all he's ever talked about is how much he loves Jalen Hurts and it's his best friend and whatnot. Does he have problems with the play calling, with the coaches? That could be one of the major things where Jalen Hurts too. I don't want to hear him talk about his bullshit at the podium anymore. I want to see actually what, like, give me a legitimate answer, dude, of like what's actually wrong. Like if he was actually fighting through a major knee injury for most of the season and he played like he did for a good portion of the season, hats off to him. But I actually want him to have like an actual sit down conversation. He needs to and voice his opinion on what's going on, because this team will only go how far he takes them. And then also with the personnel, they invest so many resources across that defensive line, and for them to basically be a no-show the entire second half of the year, they had 70 sacks last year. It was almost the NFL record. That
Yep.
number got cut. I think they have 40 sacks this year. And since that Niners game, there was no pass rush whatsoever. When you invest that much in your defensive line and offensive line, that's where you're expected to dominate and help across the line of scrimmage to help you in those games. They just failed to do that. And then because you're banking on your defensive linemen making up for the poor play at linebacker, poor play in the secondary. And when you have aging guys like Bradbury and Slay at corner, no show at safety, and Byard since he got there, Blankenship, an undrafted free agent, linebackers off the streets, if your defensive line's not dominating, those guys are going to get exposed, and that's what those teams were able to do over the second half of the year.
And that's been the identity of this organization, is investing in the trenches, having a strong offensive line, defensive line. And when it's not working, like all the other issues show face defensively, specifically, like I don't, Bradbury is a whole different story for how much he regressed from last year to this year. But for the most part, like I don't think the talent level is that night and day different from last year. The difference being like they were able to speed up other teams and force quarterbacks to get the ball out quicker, allow for less time to create separation, all those things. And it just did not happen this year. I do think the front four did show up yesterday in that loss, so I will give them some credit there. Fletcher Cox, Brandon Graham, Jalen Carter, those guys did bring it yesterday, so I'll give them a little bit of acknowledgement there. Them and Devontae Smith are really the only guys I'm happy with out of yesterday. And to swing it to Jalen specifically one more time, I think there's two different main lanes you have to look at this. There's the leadership stuff, and then there's the talent quarterback play stuff. I pretty much give him a pass on the quarterback side of things, that I actually thought he made some decent throws yesterday. And I think like the issues are very schematic and very coaching wise, play call wise. I don't think he was put in a position to succeed really for most of the season, and especially last night. So I look the other way on the quarterback play. I think you definitely he's under contract. You've already committed to this guy. I don't have concern for him at this point for the long term, but he certainly will be under more watchful eyes next season. Now, from the leadership side of things, I do think you're right about some of like the emotionless vibe, the him just staying on the sideline. And I will give a shout out to Dave Spadaro. One of the things that he keeps saying on one of our shows on Fox Sports The Gambler, that's actually set to begin at 6:00 tonight. But one of the things that he said throughout the year is, like, we can't praise him for being this way when they're winning, and then when he's acting the same way when they're losing, then criticize him for it. Now, on the other side of that, like different situations call for different responses from his perspective. And there also was kind of that Inquirer article basically questioning him as a leader. I'm not of the mindset that the quarterback always has to be like that rah-rah leader guy, that especially on a team that has Jason Kelce and has Brandon Graham, that I'm not as like upfront about him like having to be this forward-facing guy, but you're still the quarterback. You're still the guy that calls the shots. So what's kind of your vibe check on both of those areas, both from a leadership standpoint and from Jalen Hurts as just the quarterback?
I think we saw it hand in hand with the head coach and the quarterback too. I kind of wanted to touch on this at the beginning and it escaped me, but they really showed, I think, that they're front runners. Like when the going got tough, they did not get going. Like they shit their pants to be honest, when the going got tough, they shit their pants. And that is a major issue, because the head coach and the quarterback 9 times out of 10 is what drives this league. Like you get that rare defense like they had in Seattle with the Legion of Boom and everything. And Russell Wilson was a young quarterback. That is like the last real major dominant defense I can remember that drove a Super Bowl champion. When you look at all the recent Super Bowl champions, I mean, I guess the Broncos the 1 year or two with Peyton Manning, but
Yeah.
it's the head coach and quarterback that drives your team and drives your success. And they really have to be locked at the hip, I think. I mean, you just look at right now in the NFL, Patrick Mahomes and Andy Reid, I think, is the perfect example of that. So when the going got tough, they folded, and that is a major cause for concern. And for a guy like Jalen Hurts too, who I feel like has always thrived kind of the underdog mentality, like people were doubting him and doubting this team at their most, and he wasn't able to overcome that and come back from that. So I'm worried about that from mindset wise and quarterback wise. Like I remember you and I were talking about at the beginning of the year, if he went out there this year, won the MVP, won the Super Bowl, he would be anointed as the best quarterback in the league. After last night, and I go back to my same thing where I'm curious to see if he was actually fighting a major knee injury, if he is going to have like an off-season surgery, but he's fallen by, I think you could say, out of the top 10. Like I was just naming guys last night off the top of my head. I mean, I'm still putting Burrow above him, Josh Allen, Patrick Mahomes, Lamar, CJ Stroud now.
Yep.
Lawrence is in that discussion. Kirk Cousins had to be in the year. I mean, Matt Stafford still. Jared Goff might be above him. Like there's Justin Herbert. Yeah, I see. I even name my boy. I mean, that's how bad of a year both of these guys I think wound up finishing with. But he really I think fell off a cliff, and there should be major question marks around him, and it worries me a lot too. I don't want to compare it to Carson, but they both got the big payday and they both fell off. On Jalen Hurts, the whole thing around him is like never satisfied, always hungry, whatever, coming back for more. He didn't really look like that over the second half of the year. And really bad quote from him last night. I don't know if you heard it in the post game, but when he said it wasn't my turn this year, like what the hell does that mean, dude? You just got $250 million, a major extension, and looking at the face of the franchise with a win now team, Super Bowl caliber team, 10-1 team, and over the second half of the season, you completely fell off. That's inexcusable. Nobody wants to hear that. It's not my turn. Like that is absolute bullshit. And that is something that leaves me with a lot more doubt than kind of hope. And especially coming into this year, how high I was on the kid, for him to fall off like this, it was a major disappointment. And the organization is major question mark going forward because that's your guy and you really can't get out of that for the next few years.
That is almost as bad as the Nick Sirianni quote that quote, tackling is a tricky thing that he said post game, which that's just straight brutal too. And the last thing that I'll say on Jalen Hurts with the post game comments is he had every opportunity to stick up for Nick Sirianni to tone down those reports, and he did not do that. Now
I didn't know he was going anywhere.
Yeah. I get it's not his style to just be direct and shoot things down, but sometimes you have to do that. So we will see how things shake out with that. There's a lot more to come, and I'll jump to H's last two questions here before we get out of here. Said like Vrabel, but you need a mastermind offensive coordinator. Then agreed. Wouldn't mind a defensive minded coach after that. Also agree. I still think the defensive issues are pretty personnel based this year. That I think that straight up the guys that were brought in were not good enough, and even some of like the fixes to this team, the Kevin Byards, the guys that were brought in midseason, just didn't have it. The Nick Morrows, all these kind of guys like did not cut it from a personnel standpoint. And just quick side note that you will never catch me taking Justin Herbert over Jalen Hurts, no matter how bad things go. We got a little Sixers question here from H. Your thoughts on Sixers getting DeAndre Hunter from the Hawks for Tobias Melton and 2 picks. The 2 picks feels like a lot to me from the for the Sixers perspective there. I like DeJounte Murray. I know that's what the Hawks want. The Clippers picks are valuable to me. Those are kind of there's a chance I still think the Clippers go to complete trash and those turn into really high picks. So I value those 28 and 29 picks from the Clippers there specifically pretty highly. So I'm close on that. I could be talked into it potentially, but not something that I'm pounding the table and going for. If we get close to the deadline, my tone could change a little bit. But let's get ready to wrap things up here. You have any final thoughts on the Eagles as a whole, Ryan?
Yeah, I was curious. I don't think you said your opinion. Do you think Sirianni will be the head coach next season?
So I'll say to just answer directly, do I think Nick Sirianni is going to be the head coach next year? I've talked myself into yes. And I think the should and will are a little bit two different answers here. That I think the Eagles are going to end up slanting this as we fire both coordinators, we rebuild the coaching staff, and we give it another try under Nick. I think that's going to be their mindset. I think that's going to be the saving face thing from a lot of ways. I also went into this year thinking like there's zero chance that Sirianni could possibly get fired, that like no matter how bad things go, it just can't be that case. My tune changed on that throughout this last stretch of the season, that this looked like a team that quit. This looked like a team that didn't want to show up and play for their coach. And that to me is the type of performances that do call for a coach's job, regardless of what the resume or how good that they were for a point in time. So I kind of think he deserves to be fired. I don't think he ultimately will. I think that's kind of how the Eagles are going to slant this and coat this. But I do think it's going to be an ugly couple days as far as a lot of leaks, a lot of articles, and a lot of finger pointing.
Yeah, and the quitting on the coach thing, I think, is like the craziest part of this season, because you look at the team, even when they were winning games, they were getting down double digits. Like they were, I believe it was 3 or 4 straight games, they were down by 10 or more points, and they came back and won. Like that is showing fight. That is showing heart, finding a way to come back. But not being able to replicate that and continue that going forward, like something had to have happened that we just don't know of, and that's the thing with the NFL, we might never know. But I think that's the greatest mystery of the season. What actually happened in that locker room that really made the effort kind of dwindle down the stretch here, and it'll be a mystery, I guess, but maybe one day it'll come out.
Yeah, absolutely. And H, appreciate you checking in and hanging with us. Respect. Best thing that's the Mike Missinelli show. I'll take that with a high bar right there as well. So yeah, Beef, appreciate you popping on, talking some Eagles with me. And we now I will fully shift gears into the best remaining Philadelphia sports team, with that being our Philadelphia 76ers. Got a nice MVP matchup between Nikola Jokic and Joel Embiid today. So I'll be around for a post-game little stream right here on PickSwap Media as well. Ryan, thanks once again. Anything else you want to shout out before we get out of here?
Yeah, that's it. I'm looking forward to just actually enjoying the NFL playoffs the rest of the rest of the season, and then really just fully diving in on college basketball now too.
Yeah, absolutely. So time to hit the hardwood all around. I definitely will be getting in my bag for some college basketball soon too. I need to get on top of that for sure. But appreciate all you guys for tuning in for this one. If you have not already, make sure to check us out on all socials. Smash that subscribe button on YouTube. Drop a like on this video. We'll be back with you throughout the week right here on PickSwap Media.